Hello, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning from wherever you're calling in from. My name is Michael Vallone from Booz, Hamilton. I am a director at the firm based in the New York City area. I've been with the firm for a little over 15 years, and I lead our global cyber risk management practice, really helping our clients leverage advanced cyber threat risk modeling solutions to help them devise their cybersecurity programs, cybersecurity strategies, and really also on the bleeding edge of risk quantification and helping our clients leverage advanced solutions to really drive cyber analytics and metrics and things to that effect. In today's discussion, I'm going to talk about three common myths around cyber risk management and really how to leverage cyber risk management to drive your business enterprise strategy. Based on our work across companies of different industries and geographies, we've observed these types of myths, if you will, of leaders who fall under the sway of devising their business enterprise strategies and falling victim to different types of myths out there. And we'll talk about those today in more detail. And so without further ado, the first one is around cyber risk is an IT problem is the myth, right? So everyone sort of hears this, and it's evolved much more over the last few years where it's largely been a GRC problem. And that's really coming up and out to the cybersecurity and the CISO and really gotten a seat at the table at the board now, right? So really what we're focusing on here is in reality, cyber risk is a business risk. Here on the slide is a picture of a business value chain. We use value chains a lot here at Booz Allen Hamilton when we're working with our clients, really trying to understand how business and revenue and profitability and growth drives end to end through a corporation. This helps us understand ultimately where the crown jewels are, critical digital assets, and then ultimately where to refine and prioritize the cybersecurity program resources to manage risk effectively. So everybody knows, managing risk is not the responsibility of the IT team. Technology decisions can really help or harm the business. The cyber risk program really relies on inputs from the business leaders to help the right risk management decisions for every company. Every business relies heavily on technology, as you know, to really execute its most critical business processes and generate value for its companies. We'll touch on that concept later. Value is a really critical term to focus on as it relates to cybersecurity and risk management. We'll talk about that in the third myth. So back to the talk. So today's business world is really becoming more and more interconnected. As everybody knows, new cyber threats are emerging every day, not just from bad actors, but also from vulnerabilities created by a widening attack surface, as well as enhanced communications, right? Like IoT, OT. There's a non-existential device really connected to the internet ecosystem, as well as companies. Everybody wants to be digitally enabled. And this really increases the ever widening attack surface. So that's really why this is really critical. Most organizations therein really focus their cybersecurity risk management programs on reducing risk by eliminating the dangers posed by threat actors. That's really only one part of the equation. It's really time to reposition cyber risk management for the C-suite and the boards to see it for what it truly is. Cyber risk is a growth enabler as opposed to a growth inhibitor. Digital transformation has created an environment of increasingly intense competition. Agile organizations are really getting the upper hand by using cutting-edge technologies to create new products and services, provide better customer experiences, and doing it all faster and faster. I see this a lot with a lot of my high-tech SaaS-based companies, really on that bleeding edge of leveraging a cloud-based infrastructure and really outsourcing a lot of their cybersecurity work. To that end, the key enablers for digital transformation have created an environment of increasingly intense competition. And there's a lot of things around big data, cloud, collaboration, mobility, etc. Here in this entire business ecosystem, there needs to be a sufficiently agile approach to adapting to the speeds and the volume of data required by these daily transactions, while also really being able to handle the complexity of threats in a digital world. While developing new products and services, your company really needs to strike the right balance between innovation and risk. And in most cases, the more security is increased, the less user-friendly and convenient the product or services becomes. Again, really prevalent in high-tech SaaS-based companies that are really using that service-based model. But as you know, a lot of the other corporations, whether it's pharmaceutical or manufacturing, the engineers, the operators, they don't like the increased scrutiny and levity of cybersecurity controls on their business processes. Again, a strong cyber risk posture here is really essential to ensuring that innovation is not only curtailed to security concerns, but also thrives. To that end, a risk-based cybersecurity strategy really must promote innovation as well as customer growth, both which is essential for customer success. Again, back to this value chain diagram, it's fairly obvious to see, right? Like this is a Michael Porter's rendition of a value chain, which I mentioned we use a lot in our engagements with our clients. And this one's geared for manufacturing, everywhere from engineering, inbound logistics, manufacturing, all the way through marketing, sales, and use and maintenance. And so this is effectively the circle of growth and profitability. And as you can see, cyber really ultimately intersects this value chain in many different places and many different types. It can be strategic risk, it can be operational risk, compliance risk, and financial risk. Strategic risk really around engineering trade secrets, for example, exfiltrated by a threat actor sold on the dark web. Operational risk, this one's certainly near and dear to most companies. Ransomware really impacts IT systems, supply chain systems, halting operations, causing an inability to generate revenue. Compliance, audit, non-compliance audits and findings, really forcing shutting downs of fines, increased regulatory scrutiny, even closing down revenue streams and revenue channels. And then ultimately, all of this becomes a financial risk, whether it's data breaches resulting in fines, whether you're losing IP to your competitors, things to that effect. So really, this is the circle of life that is cyber risk, and really how it ultimately becomes a business risk. The next part around this myth one that I want to talk about is not only a cyber risk not an IT problem, it's also everybody's problem. As you can see here on this fairly basic graphic, most of the work we do is with our chief information security officers. They have whether it's small or large cybersecurity teams, but really, again, that's only one part of the equation. You have IT, you have audit, you have the board, you have enterprise risk management, and then ultimately you have the business. And this is a critical component to leveraging all of the information at the disposal for the cybersecurity and risk management team to pull all that information in, aggregate it, and really looking at holistically, how does cybersecurity and business risk, where are those interdependencies? And then ultimately, how can cybersecurity support the business, sustain those critical digital assets, and enable the business to thrive? This is, sort of in its simplicity, a fairly simple concept, but in theory can be certainly very complicated. That's why we take a business-centric, threat-centric approach to helping our clients. That traditional GRC mindset really doesn't work in today's society. It certainly gets you a foundational layer or foundational level of cybersecurity best practices, i.e. cyber hygiene, but really to thrive in today's advanced threat environment with the advanced adversaries, APTs, nation-state attacks, you really need to think about this in a holistic space. The next myth we're going to talk about is around all critical digital assets must be managed the same. That's actually not a reality, certainly. We really want to look at how critical digital assets are of equal value. They're all different, right? Everybody has different profiles of digital assets, whether it's information, trade secrets, it's the hardware, it's the software. And so taking a look at how all that information is intersected, we actually have here's a model of one of our risk assessment models that we've created based on COBIT and FAIR and COSO and NIST and OWASP, et cetera. And this really just helps us think through this problem space more methodically. For example, companies don't have endless resources to protect all their data at all costs, right? So you really need to deploy an agile approach versus a one-size-fits-all cyber strategy. And so the more intentional you are with looking at your critical digital assets and triaging and profiling them, the more effective your strategy is going to be. And then more in turn, you're able to optimize your cybersecurity spend, both near term as well as the future. For example, trade secrets associated with life sciences, R&D, drug development are clearly much more important than their corporate payroll information. Everybody knows this, but really, how do you put that into practice, right? That's the hard part. So again, using a model this is actually based on FAIR as well, factor analysis of information risk. We're big proponents of that. I know a lot of folks have aversions to FAIR, but it's really around how you operationalize it. And we've done some really cool things actually with CyberSaint in the CyberStrong platform to really create a scalable approach, which is actually one of the biggest issues with FAIR, is it always has a challenge around scaling. Like, what data do we need? Do we have to calibrate all this data? Where do we get the data? So you really want to use a data-driven based risk model, which CyberSaint definitely has access to. So yeah, with that said, your cyber business leaders really need to work together to identify your crown jewels. You really have to identify and prioritize assets, determine the strength of the cybersecurity protected for each one of those different assets. So you can really look at this from a data-driven analytical risk model. By increasing more transparency into this entire process, the business value at risk and potential trade-offs to be made on costs would then be more obvious to all the parties. Your executives must also lead enterprise-wide efforts to find and protect critically important data, software, and systems as part of the overall integrated business enterprise strategy, ultimately to achieve cyber resilience. So cyber resilience is another key concept. It's a term that's often thrown around the industry. It's conflated just like every other, a lot of other common terms in the industry, but it's really around enabling and protecting the value chain. So it goes back to that first topic, which I mentioned, where cybersecurity is not just an IT problem. It is absolutely the pivotal core concept to business risk and enabling of business value chain. Without cybersecurity, you have pervasive risk, and with pervasive risk, you don't really have a business. And so, I'll walk through this diagram in a little bit more detail. So, as I mentioned, we really recommend an analytical risk model like this. Everyone can use different types of risk models, but the first and foremost thing that's really important is identifying and mapping your critical digital assets, and that's really around scoping. So, this is actually often a forgotten component of risk assessments, where people are relatively just looking at controls or looking at a specific scenario. Scoping is the most important part. If you don't get scoping right, it's sort of that garbage in, garbage out approach and mentality, and you're really, you're going sideways with your analysis. And that actually happens a lot with FAIR-based risk analysis, is that organizations don't effectively scope properly, and they aren't able to really understand the results. So here you really want to identify and map your critical digital assets, including your data, your systems, your applications across your value chain. And this really gets into threat modeling concepts. We're big proponents of threat modeling as well. Again, you want to go down in the tech stack with that focus on the critical digital assets to ultimately understand how potential threat actors are going to leverage different types of threat vectors to accomplish their objectives, whether they're going to exploit your vulnerabilities, if they're going to go work around systems and harvest credentials and data, right? You need to think intentionally about this using a risk scenario-based approach and model those types of risks. Again, we recommend MITRE ATT&CK. We think it's a fantastic framework and approach by which to execute this. And I believe MITRE is actually pushing out a mapping with NIST 853 controls this year, so that should really help out with things. But anyway, back to the model. So once you have that risk analysis, you can go through and effectively model those scenarios using threat objectives, TTPs, and doing attack trees and attack enumeration, right? So really understanding across a kill chain perspective, how is that cyber scenario, whether it's ransomware, it's an APT, it's cloud misconfigured assets, right? Like, how is that attack going to exfiltrate or accomplish its objectives across the value chain or across the kill chain? And so really looking intentionally there is, an analytical model will be able to identify the controls, whether upstream or downstream, to help you through that problem space. The third myth is, this is actually a really fascinating concept, one of my favorites to talk about, is the more money you spend on cyber and risk management, the more value you'll get from your investments. That's actually a big misnomer. So value is a function of risk and return. I love this graphic. It's very simple in theory, but it's a very novel concept. And so the whole premise behind it is, as I mentioned, value is a function of risk and return. So you're either creating value or you're generating and losing value. And so I'll talk about that in more detail throughout this talk. So as I mentioned, many companies spend a lot of their cybersecurity are actually underperforming the rest of the market with respect to optimizing return on investment and operating in a risk-aligned state, right? Like, that's ultimately nirvana. Everybody wants to leverage every dollar that they're spending and get a maximum return on that dollar and operate in a risk-aligned state. That really means you're optimized, right? You're not excess resources. You're not wasting resources. the value of your investments is driving a lot of security protection and also enabling the business. If you look at the major breaches over the past several years, Sony, Target, Home Depot, etc., I'm certainly confident that their cybersecurity budgets were 10 to 100x the size of many of our mid-market clients, for example. But those mid-market clients are not breached, right? So why is that? It's a really interesting, fascinating concept that really goes back to the two myths I talked about, right? Like value chain and critical digital assets, and being really intentionally focused around devising your cybersecurity program and using cyber risk management and analytical models to enable your enterprise business strategy, right? So, if you look at Tony, Target, Home Depot, etc., they were looking, whether it's third-party supply chain, HVAC, right? They weren't protecting the right assets. And I can assure you, they certainly were not using analytical and data-driven risk models to measure and manage their cybersecurity programs. They were largely looking at security best practices, probably very heavy on the tool space. And by and large, they're really throwing money at the problem and not being intentional with their focus. So really it gets back to this concept of, some assets are extraordinary and are of critical importance to your company, and they really must be at the heart of your business enterprise strategy to protect your organization against cyber risk. Because ultimately, in a digitized world, protecting everything weekly, as we all know, is just not an option. It's almost comical. And so to that end, today's digital and highly connected, interconnected business model is really dependent on trust, right? So if the customer interface is not secure, risks become existential. System breaches, great and small, have more than doubled in the past 5 years. Attacks have grown in sophistication and complexity, as everybody knows. And most large enterprises now recognize the severity of the issue, but still treat it as a technical and control problem, even while acknowledging that their defenses will not likely keep pace with future attacks. Again, these defenses are really often designed to protect the perimeter of the business operations and are applied disjointly across different parts of the organization. We see this all the time with inorganic growth. A lot of companies that go through high mergers and acquisitions to drive inorganic growth, right? They have a lot of their unknown unknowns, effectively, right? It's a lot of different attack surface, and as well as any organization with an OT, operational technology component. They have large manufacturing facilities, whether domestic or abroad, all over the planet. And each one of these OT facilities, manufacturing facilities, effectively operate as their own little business sometimes. And it's really important to drive centralization around that entire cyber and business risk ecosystem. And the bigger you are, the bigger the problem is, and the harder it really is. And so our experience and research really suggests that the next wave of innovation around customer applications and business processes and technology structures must be based on a business and technical approach that prioritizes the protection of the business's critical information assets. This really goes back to cyber resilience, like enabling and protecting your value chain, which is effectively a cross-functional strategy that identifies and assesses vulnerabilities, defines goals on an enterprise-wide business basis, and works out how best to deliver them. A primary dimension of cyber resilience is really around the identification of the crown jewels, which we talked about in that previous myth, and then really being mindful of this principle on this slide, that every decision either increases, preserves, or erodes value. And I'll say that again, because I think this concept is really just fascinating. Getting back to, the principle is every decision either increases, preserves, or erodes value. And so given risk is integral to the pursuit of value, strategic-minded enterprises do not strive to eliminate risk or even to minimize it. This really represents a fundamental shift in traditional view of risk is always something to mitigate or risk is always something bad. Strategic enterprises and a lot of our clients, right, we're really trying to take that mindset from reactive to proactive, where they're really pursuing risk, right? So strategic enterprises are really leveraging risk across the organization to drive value and growth. It's fairly simple based on this graphic here. So most companies are either spending too little and taking on too much risk, or they're spending too much and losing too much value, right? So how do you find that sweet spot? That is, it's not easy, right? You can't just put your finger in the wind and measure this by red, yellow, green risk models, right? This is really where it comes back into using a data-driven, analytical, probabilistic risk quantification solution. That's really the name of the game, right? And that's where a lot of our clients are moving towards. We're doing some really cool things in that space, and we're seeing a lot of really high return on investment on results. And this is a conversation that's going to the board more and more across all of our Fortune 500 clients, or many of our Fortune 500 clients, especially with the SEC regulations coming out around risk quantification. What does that mean, and how do I report on it? Right? It's become like certainly a hot topic across many different industries, certainly ones that are highly regulated. And again, really just thinking around how to achieve optimal risk taking strikes the balance between spend, value, and risk taking, which ultimately enables your organization to strategically pursue risk and achieve your strategic objectives, right, around whether it's cost optimization or cloud or cost management or digital transformation or even M&A. So a lot of those types of concepts. So to pull this all together, and I'll wrap it up, and then we'll open up for questions if I can figure out how to do that with this format. So pulling this all together is really talking about like next generation cyber risk management. It's really what pulls a lot of these components together. It's really what we're calling it within Booz Allen, whether it's integrated risk management. It's everything that's evolved from GRC effectively, right? So while companies are really beginning to understand all that's at stake when a breach occurs, the loss of data, the loss of brand trust, customer lawsuits, there's considerable room to better understand how to measure and manage your cyber risk exposure, and really ultimately leveraging these types of concepts to improve your decision making. Right? It's fairly simple. Cybersecurity and risk management together really improves decision making. It removes that subjectivity, it increases that defensibility, and it allows our clients, whether it's a chief information security officer or a CIO or a CTO, to go to the CFO and say, hey, look, I need X, Y, and Z, and here's the data to prove it, right? So if you invest in a predictive risk management and cyber risk quantification type solution, whether it's a service like CyberSaint, CyberStrong, which we've partnered with on CyberSaint and pushed that out to market, doing some really cool things in that space, right? And there's lots of other tools out there as well that do things like this. Again, to really just avoid the pitfalls we've talked about today, cybersecurity risk management must be approached within the context of an ecosystem. Really need to apply a threat-centric and business risk-focused lens to quantify your risk exposure in dollars and cents. And this approach really highlights the interconnected relationships between enterprise within the broader security environment and the value chains in determining a resilient strategy to enable the business. So I'll leave you all with a few recommendations in parting. The first one really is around stop making subjective assumptions and start measuring your data using analytical data-driven risk models. And we talked about a bunch of different ways today. There's lots of different vendors out there, including CyberSaint, which you can test out, do a POC with to see if it works for you. But effectively, the old saying goes, compliance does not equal security, and measuring cyber control maturity, whether it's NIST cybersecurity framework or 853 and a 1 to 5 CMM ranking, that's still effectively compliance-based risk analysis, and it's really just a proxy for risk, and it's only going to move the needle so much. The second recommendation is report actionable information to your executive team. As a security professional, everybody knows they have their role in the company, audit, C-suite, the board, which we talked about, really want assurance that the security controls in place are effectively protecting the company and your critical digital assets, right? This is coming out more and more with SEC guidance. And so as you bring in more high fidelity solutions and do some more threat and risk modeling, you're able to provide more actionable information, higher fidelity insights to your key decision makers. And that's really the name of the game. And then the third one is really around driving adoption and change and mindset to enable your cyber resilience strategy. As we talked about today, technology alone will not achieve risk reduction and improve cyber resilience. Really need to recognize the risk of not driving change management and accompanying change management and transformation required for a shift in this mindset to account for the people component of cyber risk management exposure and really operating in a risk aligned state. We've done some cool things, and we can recommend doing risk scenario based tabletop events, almost similar to an incident response or a breach type event. Works really well getting the business on board these types of ideas, really shifting that mindset and really shifting that mindset from a reactive, stay in my silo, to more of a proactive, let's all collaborate and norm on this problem, and we have a shared responsibility. And also in parallel, we recommend developing tailored education and awareness campaigns with your business leaders, as well as across any sort of internet sites, to really build bridges with your business counterparts through that weigh-in, buy-in approach. Again, like the cybersecurity program is really ultimately there to support the business, and you have to understand the needs of the business, and so it's really critical to that end. So, well, that's it for today. I know there's just a couple minutes left, so I will try to figure out how to open this up for questions. Let's see if I can figure this out. Maybe there's not a way to do that. Anyway, I will sit here for a minute or two. If there's a way to figure out how to do questions, I'm happy to take them. This last slide I have up here, I can actually quickly walk through it. It's another one of our slides we use to educate our buyers, whether it's the CIO or a CTO. It really gets into that concept of cybersecurity as a business risk, and understanding how to measure and manage risk by using a risk scenario based approach. And these are some really cool quotes from Mike Rogers, former director of NSA and the director of US Cybercom. And I'll just quickly walk through them at a high level. Like, understanding what are your most likely risk scenarios. If you can understand how to defend against those, you could deal with most cyber attacks. And some cool principles around that are, certainly understanding your highest probability and impact risk scenarios, having a consistent way to measure those risk scenarios. Again, consistency is critical and pivotal here. Understanding how much risk is acceptable. So really getting intentional and disciplined around risk tolerance and risk thresholds. Most of our clients, or many of our clients, have it's a challenging topic, right, to figure out risk appetite. So you really need to be intentional on this, and you can use things like COBIT and COSO to really help you think through things like that. And this last quote here from Mike Rogers, which I actually really like as well, is, I tell boards to prepare the exact same way. Is in every other area of the business, you need to prioritize, decide where you can take risk, and then ultimately where you can get that greatest return on, and that's what you focus on. So I think that really aligns nicely to some of the things we've talked about today, where cyber risk management is really a business aligned function. The business needs to be cyber risk informed, and cyber risk management is ultimately focused and calculated. Again, using different types of tools, processes, as well as certainly people. So that's definitely it for me. Looks like we're right at the top of the hour. So I appreciate everybody that attended the session. Hopefully you found something new and insightful in it. And if there's a way to network afterwards, I'm happy to take any questions and talk more about it. I'm a huge fan of this topic. And yeah, thank you.